How powerful to see each other's faces. According to our sages, even before creating the world, God created tshuva, the possibility of turning and returning and coming home. As the Midrash teaches in Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer, before the world was created, all that existed was God and God's great name. God decided to create the world, and God carved it out, but it did not stand. This can be compared to a king who wanted to build his palace. Without first carving out foundations in the ground, he would not be able to begin building. Similarly, when God created the world, it would not stand until the creation of tshuva. The existence and vitality of the world depends on the truth that tshuva is always in reach, that no matter how far we have wandered, no matter how lost we have become, no matter where we have been in the past year, no matter what we have done and what we have failed to do, no matter how far we are from the vision of our lives and our world as we long for them to be, transformation and reconciliation are still possible. On this Kol Nidre Eve, each one of us is welcome here as we are in our sacred community. As the poet Rumi writes, "Come, come, whoever you are, wanderer, idolater, lover of leaving, it doesn't matter. Ours is not a caravan of despair. Come, even if you have broken your vow 1,000 times. Come, yet again. Come, come." On this Yom Kippur, unlike any other we have experienced, we are tasked with our age-old mission of reconnecting to our holy potential, with unearthing our creativity and courage, our spiritual boldness, and our moral imagination. We are tasked with rejoicing in our beautifully imperfect humanity. And as God's agents of compassion in this world down here, we are called to see this potential for goodness in the eyes of each and every person, in our homes, on the screen, in the sanctuary, in the streets. The Kol Nidre service begins with the prayer leader asking permission from the heavenly and earthly courts to come together in prayer with all of us who have transgressed. In our splendid humanness, indeed, we have all made mistakes. And we are confident that though we will try to be better, chances are we will make more mistakes. And so we pray not just for forgiveness for past mistakes, but forgiveness for our future selves. We open our hearts to receive God's gift of tshuva that is older than time itself and that is always available to us. We come together this Kol Nidre Eve, all of us holy, all of us human, all of us doing the best we can. Knowing that we are held and loved as we are, may we have the courage to continue together on our journey of tshuva. We open our machzor to page 204, and we rise as we're able as the ark is opened.
ישיבה של מעלה וישיבה של מטה, על דעת המקום ועל דעת הקהל, אנו מתירים להתפלל עם העבריינים. בישיבה של מעלה ובישיבה של מטה, על דעת המקום ועל דעת הקהל, אנו מתירים להתפלל עם העבריינים. בישיבה של מעלה ובישיבה של מטה, על דעת המקום ועל דעת הקהל, אנו מתירים להתפלל עם העבריינים. כל נדרי
Give it a try.
ושרי וחרמי וקונמי וכינויי וכינוסי ושבועות, נדרנה ודשתבנה ודאחרימנה ותיאסרנה על נפשתנה. מיום כיפורים זה עד יום כיפורים הבא עלינו, לטובה. כולהון יכרתנה והון, כולהון יהון שרן. שביkin, שביtin, בטלין ומבוטלין, לשרירין ולקיימים. נדרנה נדרי ושרנה לשרי ושבועתנה לשבועות. כל נדרי ושרי וחרמי וקונמי וכינויי וכינוסי ושבועות. דין דרנה ודשתבנה ודאחרימנה ודי אסרנה על נפשתנה מיום כיפורים זה עד יום כיפורים הבא עלינו לטובה. כל הון יחרטנה והון כל הון יהון שרן בטלים מבוטלים לשנים ולקיימים נדרנה לנדרי וסרנה ושבועתנה לשבועות. וכינויי וכינוסי ושבועות. דין דרנה Shatana. Yom Kippurim Zeh Ad Yom Kippurim
Abba Aleinu, Abba Aleinu.
Aleinu Letova Ulhon Icharat Navehon Kulhon Yehon Sheraran Shevikin Shevitin Metelin Umavutalin Lashirin Vilakayamin Nidrana La Nidre Ve'esarana Shavuotana La Shavuot V'nislach lechol adat b'nei Yisrael v'lager agar b'tocham ki lecholam ishkaga v'nislach lechol adat b'nei Yisrael v'lager agar b'tocham ki lecholam ishkaga v'nislach lechol adat b'nei Yisrael v'lager agar b'tocham ki lecholam ishkaga. Silach nalabon hazeh ki godel chasdecha V'chasher nasata la'am hazeh mimitzrayim bi'adheina v'sham ne'emar V'yomer Adonai salachti kidvarecha V'yomer Adonai salachti kidvarecha V'yomer Adonai salachti kidvarecha. We'll recite Shechianu together at the bottom of the page. Baruch atah
Adonai Eloheinu, melech haolam, שהחיינו וקיימנו והגיענו לזמן הזה. ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם, שהחיינו וקיימנו והגיענו לזמן הזה.
חג שמח. Begin our Mariv service on page 207. Lai, 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 lai. Lai, 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 lai. Lai, 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 lai. Adonai Amevorach.
Baruch Adonai Amevorach leolam vaed.
Baruch Adonai Amevorach leolam vaed.
We can be seated.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher bidvaro mari v'ravim chachmei Hashem. Umavir yom, umevi laila, umavdil ben yom uven laila, Adonai tzvaot shemo. El Chai v'Kayam Tamid Yimloch Aleinu Leolam Vaed Baruch Atah Adonai Amari Varavim.
Page 208.
Ahavat Olam Beit Yisrael Amcha Ahavtam. Ki hem chayenu v'yorech yameinu uvaheh יומם ולילה, ואהבתך אל תסיר ממנו לעולמים. ברוך אתה אדוני אוהב עמו ישראל. שמע ישראל, אדוני אלוהינו, אדוני אחד. ברוך שם כבוד מלכותו לעולם ועד. ואהבת את אדוני אלוהיך בכל לבבך ובכל נפשך ובכל מאודיך, והיו הדברים האלה אשר אנוכי מצווך היום על לבביך, ושיננתם לבניך ודיברת בם, בשבתך בביתך ובלכתך בדרך,
ושוכבך וקומך,
וקשרתם להיות על ידיך, והיו לטוטפות בין עיניך, וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך ובשעריך. והיה אם שמוע תשמע מצותי שנכנסו. ושאמר דבר בני ישראל ומצאו להם נתון ציצית על כנפי ידיהם ודורתם ונתונות ציצית הכנף בסוד אחרת ולכם ציצית תראו אחרי לבבכם אחרי עיניכם אשר אתם מצלם אחרי למען תסגרו ועשיתם את מצותי ואתם קדושים שציפים ותצאו לכם אדוני אלוהיכם. אדוני אלוהיכם אמת ואמונה כל זאת וקיים עלינו, כי הוא אדוני אלוהינו אין זולתו. העושה גדולות עד אין חקר נפלנו.
Page 210.
ומלכותו ורצון קיבלו עליהם משה ובני ישראל, לכנו שירה בשמחה רבה ויאמרו כולם מי כמוך באלים אדוני, מי כמוך נדר וקודש, נורא תהילות אוסף אלה. מלכותך ראו בניך, בוקע ים לפני משה, זה לי אנו ויאמרו אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד. ונאמר כי פדו אדוני את יעקב, וגאלו מיד חזק ממנו. ברוך אתה אדוני, על ישראל.
Page 211, we pray for peace and protection.
השכיבנו אדוני אלוהינו לשלום, לשלום, והעמידנו מלכנו לחיים. ופרוס עלינו סוכת שלומך, ופרוס עלינו סוכת שלומך. השכיבנו אדוני אלוהינו לשלום, לשלום, והעמידנו מלכנו לחיים. ופרוס עלינו סוכת שלומך, ופרוס עלינו סוכת שלומך. Amen. Shelter us beneath your wings, O Adonai. Guard us from all harmful things, O Adonai. Keep us safe throughout the night, till we wake with morning's light. Teach us, God, wrong from right. Amen. Ashkivenu Adonai Eloheinu l'shalom, l'shalom, ve'hamidenu malkeinu l'chaim. Ufros aleinu sukkot shlomecha, baruch atah Adonai, aporei sukkot shalom aleinu, v'al kol amo Yisrael, v'al Yerushalayim.
Amen.
כי יום הזה יכפר עליכם.
For these Yomim Noraim, we asked members of our congregation to reflect on the theme of lost and found, what I lost this year and what I found. And we're blessed that some of the people who wrote pieces will share them with us on this Yom Kippur and watch in the econ coming this week as we will share in writing all of the reflections that we received. And our first reflection comes from Alex Azel.
Okay, so I lost my grandmother this past year, the day before Yom Kippur. But in losing her, I found the full extent of her generosity. I learned that in addition to donating regularly to a domestic violence shelter, she had also chosen some personal items of value to be sold, the proceeds going to that shelter, thinking of other people even in thinking of her death. And also that my grandfather is still receiving mailers for a dozen different charities she subscribed to that none of us really knew about. I've reconnected with extended family members after the funeral, some of whom I hadn't seen in recent years as people got married and had children and moved out of town. They told me about their own cherished memories of my grandmother, and I learned that she still sent out birthday cards to all of them. I got to look through all of her photos and saw how close she was to her siblings, which gave me a fuller appreciation for how much it hurt her to be the only one left out of 7 siblings. I call my grandfather more and I say I love you more, and I have more compassion for my father, her son, even when we clash. I miss her a lot, and a memory is never going to be as good as the real thing, but I feel as though my memory is more complete. And because of that, I cherish it more deeply.
Continue now with the introduction to the personal Amidah from Mariv. I invite you to rise and join with Rabbi Yosef as we look to the second paragraph on page 212.
כי ביום הזה יכפר עליכם לטהר אתכם מכוח חטאותיכם לפני אדוני תתארו. יתגדל ויתקדש שמי רבה בעלמא דברה חירותי וימליך מלכותי בחייכון וביומכון ובחיי דכל בית ישראל בגלה ובזמן קריב במהרה אמן. יהי שמי רבה מברך לעולם ולעולמי עלמיה יתברך. יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל שמי דקודשם בריחו לעילה לעילה מכל ברכתה ושירתה תושבחתה ונחמתה תמירן בעלמה במהרה אמן.
We rise for the personal Amidah, pages 213 through 221.
Yana emsacha mekomcha na'alav v'ne'elam ve'ana lo emsacha kevodcha malei olam darashti kirvatcha bechol libi kiraticha utzeiti likratcha likrati mitzaticha ay la 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 ay la 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 ay la la ay la 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 ay la 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 ay la la ay la la ay la la darashti kirvatcha bechol libi kiraticha utzeiti likratcha likrati mitzaticha ay la 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 ay la 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 ay la 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 ay la 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 ay la la ay la la ay la la yana emsacha mekomcha na'alav v'ne'elam ve'ana lo emsacha kevodcha malei olam.
On the night after my father's unveiling, my extended family, aunts and uncles, cousins and all, gathered in my mom's living room to watch old family movies that my dad's youngest brother, Jerry, had brought. Like so many family records these days, the videos had journeyed from silent 8mm film to VHS to DVD. And at some point in the 1990s, while making the original set of VHS tapes, my Uncle Jerry had sat with his mother and asked her to narrate the silent movies, explaining all of the people and places in these clips from the 1940s and 50s. It was all good fun for a while, until a middle-aged African-American woman came on screen holding a white toddler, and my grandmother exclaimed with palpable affection, "Oh my, it's Blackie." There was a collective cringe as we all had the same thought. There's no way that woman's given name was Blackie. But that was clearly how my Grandma Sarah of blessed memory knew her and remembered her some 50 years later, without any self-consciousness. God forbid we should speak ill of the dead. My grandmother was a kind, loving woman, not someone I ever thought of as racist or bigoted. Her reaction to seeing the nanny on screen was unambiguously warm. But there is a context to Grandma Sarah's life that shaped the way she approached the world. Born to Ukrainian immigrant parents in Hattiesburg, Mississippi in 1917, my grandmother moved to Mobile, Alabama as a teenager. My father, her eldest son, was born there in 1940 and lived in Mobile right up until he came here to Penn in 1958. After the Army and a brief return to Mobile, my father took a job with the Coca-Cola Company in Atlanta, which is where I was born and raised. A Southern Jew's life is defined by liminal ambivalence, belonging and not belonging, privilege and exclusion. Jewish day school insulated me to a large extent, but on those occasions where I was outside of an explicitly Jewish context, day camps, Boy Scout troops, I felt very clearly how I almost belonged, but not quite. I was white, but I was not really part of the mainstream. For that, you had to be Baptist, Episcopal, Methodist. I ate different things. I celebrated different holidays. I went to church on a different day. And that was Atlanta in the 1980s and 90s. My father, who went to public school in Mobile in the 1950s, was outright barred from various school clubs. His parents knew not to bother applying for a country club membership. But when push came to shove, they were white, and that made all the difference. After the unveiling, my daughter Odelia and I took a road trip with my uncles, Jerry and Bill, back to Mobile for a tour of their and my father's childhood. It was a trip I had hoped to take with my dad before he passed away, and I'm forever grateful that my uncles took the time to make the trip with us. I think we spent almost as much time in the car on the way there and back as we did in Mobile itself. And that gave us a lot of time to hear stories about my grandparents and growing up in Alabama. Much of what they shared was new to me, mostly because I now have questions that I never thought to ask when my grandparents were alive. And I'm still struggling to make sense of who they were and how they related to their world. My Uncle Bill recalled a gathering of adults at their house on the night that George Wallace, a militant segregationist, was elected governor, how his parents and their Jewish friends worried about the implications of such an outspoken bigot in power. And yet he also acknowledged that his parents were not civil rights activists, probably believed that African Americans were essentially inferior to white people. They knew black people as domestic servants and laborers, not as neighbors. The store that my great-grandfather opened, that my grandfather operated, that my dad and his brothers worked in on the weekends, had a separate colored entrance. Jim Crow was their world. A few weeks before my father died, I had the opportunity to interview him about his life and experiences. At the very end of our interview, he told me the story of his own awakening to the injustice of segregation, and tonight, with Zoom's help, we can hear him tell the story in his own words. By the time of our interview, my father's cancer had weakened his voice, so you may need to adjust your volume a little bit as we listen. His story takes place in my grandfather's store in Pritchard, Alabama, a suburb of Mobile, around 1955.
We were talking earlier about racism, and a story comes to mind when I say the store. The store was in Pritchard, which was a suburb of Mobile. Majority black inhabitants, residents, and farmers who would come in from the surrounding farms. But the store had men's room and women's room, and colored and white. They had water fountains, colored and white. That was the way it was. And when I was a teenager, let's say 15, 16, working there one Saturday probably, one of the jobs I had was sorting out the hangers, the wooden hangers from the wire hangers, etc., and breaking down boxes, making them flat for what was then garbage. We didn't have recycle. And that room was right off of the shoe department, and the water fountain was in the shoe department. So I could see the people shopping, and I could see the fountains. And as I looked out one afternoon, there was an older black woman and a little boy, 3 or 4 years old. And he wandered over to the water fountain, and there was a step stool for kids, and he climbed up to the white fountain. And she turned and she saw him, and the panic in her face, and she rushed over and grabbed him off of that stool and started looking around to see if anybody had seen. And she saw me watching, and the fear in her eyes. And that's when I got it, that there was something really wrong here, that this didn't make any sense. But up until then, it was just, that was the way it was. We were talking.
That was the way it was. A grown woman terrified of a teenage boy who saw her toddler touch a water fountain. But my dad was white, and they were black. Their world gave my father, not even an adult, extraordinary power. Had he repeated the story to the wrong people, potentially even the power of life and death. And that power disparity, not only in the Jim Crow South, but throughout America, going back to the arrival of the first slave ship in 1619, has warped the lives of everyone in this country, continues to warp our lives to this very day. All summer, I've been haunted by a hand-lettered sign I saw a young white woman carry during the Black Lives Matter marches. It read, "Privilege is when you think something isn't a problem because it isn't a problem for you." I've lived my life behind layers of privilege. I go to sleep every night, secure in the knowledge that armed police will not kick in my door in a no-knock raid and then riddle my home with bullets, as they did to Breonna Taylor. I've been pulled over now and again, but aside from a few fines and some grief from Rebecca about my bad driving, it's no big deal. Unlike Philando Castile, shot 7 times at close range during a traffic stop. As my children get older, I don't have the same worries about their safety that parents of black children bear. For my children, police mean help and safety. I've known this for a long time, but there was something about that sign. Privilege is when you think something isn't a problem because it isn't a problem for you, that drove home what it meant for me to live with levels of privilege that so many others are denied. Even as I strive to examine my privilege, I'm still caught off guard by the extent to which that privilege blinds me. At the beginning of the summer, I was invited to join a virtual panel hosted by my former congregation in Chicago that would bring together all of the former associate rabbis in conversation with the senior rabbi we served with, to explore what this time of COVID would mean for the future of synagogues. I was honored to be invited, excited to be back with my former community, albeit virtually, and eager to be in conversation with other colleagues about the new world emerging around us. Then I got the promotional flyer and saw my face smiling back at me in the midst of a lineup of 6 white men. Under the heading, "The Future of the American Synagogue." And suddenly it sank in. Despite years of working alongside women in the rabbinate, despite having gone to great lengths to ensure that I always included a woman on any panel of rabbis I organized, here I had failed to ask who else would be on the panel before accepting, had failed even to stop and think about what I knew for myself, that all the alumni rabbis of that congregation were white men. I should have seen for myself what that panel would end up looking like, but I didn't stop to reflect and notice. As the event started to be promoted, a local colleague reached out to ask for my commitment in the spirit of gender justice allyship to decline invitations to all-male panels. Her email was exceptionally kind, for which I am beyond grateful, but also unflinching in holding up to me a mirror in which I could see the impact of my actions on the women in my field. I had, in fact, already made that commitment to myself long ago, but I thought this time, given the circumstances, that the invitations were specifically for rabbis who had already served this particular congregation. I thought this time I could make an exception. I was wrong. As Rabbi Jonathan Wittenberg, one of England's leading Masorti rabbis, writes, "To think of oneself as morally insulated from one's community is to misunderstand the nature of responsibility. We are as responsible as our sphere of influence. This doesn't mean that we are personally guilty for every wrong that a host of other people may commit. But it does mean that we are answerable for the wider impact of our behavior on society, as well as for the impact it might have had were we to have found the wisdom and the courage to conduct ourselves otherwise." What my fellow rabbi was saying to me in her email was that we work as a community of rabbis, and women are counting on men like me to exercise the wisdom and courage Wittenberg describes in order to expand equity in a field that was exclusively a male domain until recently. I was afraid to question the makeup of the panel. I was honored to have been invited. I didn't want to be the guy who spoiled the fun for everyone else, rained on a program that the other rabbis seemed so excited to be a part of. My courage faltered at the very moment when I needed it most. I didn't speak out when I should have, and I'm sorry I didn't. The regret still feels very present for me, and I hope it sticks around, not as a punishment, but so I will remember next time to make different choices, ones I can feel more proud of. There's a little paragraph that slips into the private Amidah for Yom Kippur all the way at the end after the confessions. Our high holiday prayers are so different to begin with that it took me years to really notice this piece, and even more time for its true meaning to set in. It's a curious little prayer, personal, phrased in the singular, I, when as a rule our prayers are plural, we, despairing when so many of our tefillot are hopeful. Situated at the very end of the Amidah, I suspect many of us skip over it entirely in an effort to catch up with the davening as the leader's repetition begins. And yet this short prayer, I believe, holds a key to understanding what this day is all about. Oh my God, even before I was created, I was unworthy, and now, having been created, I am barely more than before. Afar ani b'chayai kal v'chomer b'mitati. I am dust during my lifetime, that much more in death. Harei ani lefanecha kichli malei busha uchlima. Here I am before you like a vessel filled with embarrassment and shame. May it be your will, Adonai, my God and God of my ancestors, that I sin no more. And as for those sins I have committed before you, scrape them away with your great compassion, just not through suffering or terrible illness. The process of tshuva, repentance, return, demands that we break down our self-construction in order to rebuild. Within the armored towers of pride, entitlement, and yes, privilege, we remain insulated from the questions, doubts, and regrets that drive tshuva. Think about the way we describe an arrogant person. We say they are full of themselves. What a brilliant turn of phrase. Pride fills us up with our own self-constructed image, crowding out the image of God. And if we can't see the image of God within ourselves, and so the work of the day becomes emptying ourselves out, stripping away the layers of self-regard that hold us back from making change. And to the extent we have enjoyed privilege that came at the expense of others in society, Yom Kippur demands that we account for our privilege and the costs it imposes upon others, and then use that accounting for acts of restitution. And that restitution will not come easily. In her new book, Caste, the most recent selection of BZBI's anti-racist reading group, which emerged out of the discussion series Confronting Racism as Jews, facilitated earlier this year by Rabbi Batya Glazer, Isabel Wilkerson lays out the evidence for America's racial and class struggles emerging from a deeper caste system that has always sorted and ranked the people who live within our borders, with people of African descent and indigenous peoples at the very bottom, and women always beneath men within each caste. I, born white and male, straight and cisgender, into a relatively affluent family in the South, I find the book highly unsettling. And like the email I received from my fellow rabbi about my appearing on an all-male panel, I find it impossible to deny the truth in Wilkerson's portrait of our history and our present. And the most difficult truth of all is that the fact that I don't personally harbor racist attitudes means little when the system itself, our laws, our education and healthcare systems, our business culture, is set up to perpetuate a racially stratified caste system. I imagine the term anti-racist may be new to many of us. I only encountered it for the first time about a year ago. What exactly do we mean by describing a person or group as anti-racist? When racial bias is encoded into the system, simple neutrality doesn't go far enough. America's caste system will perpetuate itself even without my help. And it's important to note that privilege is not an on-off switch. It's possible to be privileged in some respects and disadvantaged by privilege in others. Take, for example, a white woman, privileged by race, disadvantaged by gender. Change will only come when we take an active stance to address the harmful consequences of caste privilege in America. It is not enough to not be racist or sexist, Wilkerson insists. Our times call for being pro-African American, pro-woman, pro-Latino, pro-Asian, pro-Indigenous, pro-humanity in all its manifestations. Defeating racism requires more of us than just to abandon ideas and prejudices. It demands that we work tirelessly to dismantle the hierarchy of race itself, a hierarchy that has been in place for over 400 years, which was encoded into the founding documents of our country, and which continues to shape the fates of Americans today in areas as diverse as health, education, political power, business, and above all else, criminal justice. In breaking down the walls of entitlement that hinder our tshuva, we must interrogate our privilege and understand how it shapes our experience of the world. As hard as I have worked to get where I am today, I also recognize that I received an immense head start. My parents sent me to private Jewish day schools and a great college, supported me through 5 years of rabbinical school and business school. They were able to do all of that because of my father's career as a Fortune 500 executive after he attended Wharton and served as an officer in the U.S. Army. His family could send him to Penn in large part because of the wealth my grandfather and great-grandfather built through their store and other real estate investments. And while both of them were extremely savvy businessmen, there can be no denying the fact that the essential ticket to their success in Mississippi and Alabama was the color of their skin. We all worked hard, but none of us earned our complexion. And even though my father, grandfather, and great-grandfather all faced levels of anti-Semitism that I have not personally encountered, those struggles pale in comparison to the immense advantages we received simply because of the color of our skin. Our own people has suffered unspeakable horrors throughout history. Even in this country, where we have been spared the worst ravages visited upon our ancestors, outright discrimination against Jews was widespread until very recently. And as if we could forget, violent anti-Semitism is on the rise again right here in America. Wilkerson draws explicit links between the racial caste system that has always forced Black Americans to the bottom, the surging hatred toward Muslim and Latino immigrants, and the growing anti-Semitism that led most terribly to the terrorist attack at Tree of Life Synagogue 2 years ago. Indeed, one of the most disturbing revelations in Wilkerson's books are the ways in which Nazi leaders, Yamach Shemam, not only knew that America had a racial caste system, but studied how our country treated its Black citizens in order to best understand how they could segregate, dehumanize, and ultimately slaughter Europe's Jews. At the same time, we should not make the mistake of equating the Jewish story of oppression with the suffering endured by Black people in this country. Wilkerson challenges us to see beyond our own experiences in order to find empathy for those who have suffered at the hands of America's caste system. She writes, "When an accident of birth aligns with what is most valued in a given caste system, whether being able-bodied, male, white, or other traits in which we had no say, it gives that lottery winner a moral duty to develop empathy for those who must endure the indignities that they themselves have been spared, to listen with a humble heart, to understand another's experience from their perspective, not as we imagine we would feel. It may be that we hear stories that resonate with our own history, and I have sometimes heard from Black clergy that Jewish stories of perseverance and redemption, from the Bible all the way through to the Shoah and the founding of the State of Israel, have offered them visions of hope and inspiration. Nevertheless, the fact remains that our experience is not the same as the Black experience. It turns out that a person can be a target of discrimination and a beneficiary of privilege at the same time. Even in the days of social anti-Semitism, restricted clubs, and the like, white Jews enjoyed most, if not all, of the privileges of whiteness. We remember the lynching of Leo Frank, which prompted the founding of the ADL, as a seminal event in American Jewish history precisely because it was such a singular and rare event, whereas lynching of African Americans was commonplace. We must listen with humility when our Black neighbors, and especially those who sit at the intersection of Black and Jewish, tell their own stories in their words, from their perspective. Wilkerson's portrait of America's caste system helped me find a new understanding of one of Yom Kippur's perennial enigmas. Why does our confession take the form of a fixed litany of sins, phrased in plural, many of which none of us have actually committed? Ashamnu, Hamasnu, Tsararnu, Ta'inu, Titanu. We have sinned. We have been violent, we have oppressed, we have gone astray, we have led others astray. We may not have done these things with our own hands, but we have, if through no fault of our own, inherited a system that does them all. As Rabbi Wittenberg reminds us, we are as responsible as the sphere of our influence. The fact that I personally did not own slaves or write discriminatory laws pales in comparison to the degree to which I, as a straight cisgender white man, directly benefit from the marginalization of people of color, women, and the LGBTQ community, just by walking in the world. And none of that is earned. It simply came to me in the lottery of being born. America spilled Breonna Taylor's blood. America stole George Floyd's breath. Philadelphia is where Dominique Remy Fells, a black trans woman, lived and was murdered. Al chet shechatanu lefanecha biyodim uvlo yodim, we have sinned whether we knew it or not. We are left to face two unpalatable choices: to accept the tainted bounty of privilege and thereby become complicit in America's poisonous caste system, or to use what privilege we have to push back against the system on behalf of equality and true justice. I believe that our tradition, in holding up the divine image in each human and commanding us to remember at all times our historical experiences of oppression and suffering, our tradition calls us to take the second course, to recognize our privilege and to take concrete actions in service of restitution to those who have been beaten down, disenfranchised, oppressed, mistreated, tortured, murdered, in order to build and sustain the hierarchy in which we were all raised. Restitution may seem easy in theory. A thief needs to pay back what he stole. But when it comes to privilege, racism, the American caste system, restitution becomes not only complex, but extremely painful. To choose just one personal example, when I think about how I should have responded to the panel invitation I received this summer, pointing out to the organizers that women and people of color would not be represented, asking how we might address that issue, and potentially bowing out if necessary, I would have made myself vulnerable in opening up these concerns, risked disapproval or criticism from more senior colleagues, and potentially forfeited future invitations. Despite the potential cost, I wish I had summoned the courage necessary to take that risk. And I honestly believe that my fellow rabbis would have heard what I had to say. And they would not have been able to hear that from a woman because there were no women in the conversation in the first place. The people on the bottom of our caste system bear the lion's share of the costs, but lack the means to fix the problems on their own, as they did not create the system. It was made by people who look like me, and I must have an active hand in dismantling it. I, a white, heterosexual, cisgender man, must stand for gender equality alongside women, insist on racial justice beside people of color, ally with the queer community to stand up for equal dignity before the law and society. And if the costs of restitution are significant on an individual scale, they become monumental when we consider what it might take to redress the historical toll. How does a society make restitution for tens of millions of black bodies stolen from Africa and trafficked as property on our shores? We know fewer than half of the names of the black men, women, and children who were lynched, by which I mean publicly tortured and murdered, with the tacit permission and often the active participation of law enforcement and government officials. And even the total number of people murdered in these acts of terror is an estimate, and probably much lower than the true total. From slavery to sharecropping to redlining to the prison industrial complex, for 4 centuries our country has accumulated wealth on the literal backs of our black and brown siblings. Even if we could wave a wand and erase the history of a caste system that is fundamentally racial, but also breaks along lines of gender, sexual orientation, and disability, it would not be enough. Because the last 400 years have given some of us such a vast head start over others that it is too late for equality of opportunity. This year, I hear Maimonides' first principle of tshuva ringing in my ears. There can be no tshuva without honest confession and full restitution. For close to 30 years, Michigan Representative John Conyers Jr. introduced a piece of legislation known as H.R. 40 during each session of Congress. Conyers' bill, which following his death last year has been championed by Texas Representative Sheila Jackson Lee, calls for a congressional study of slavery and its lingering effects, as well as recommendations for appropriate remedies. 2 paths are generally suggested as appropriate remedies: truth and reconciliation commissions and formal reparations. Precisely the honest confession and full restitution Maimonides sets as prerequisites for tshuva. And yet, over 3 decades, no matter which party was in power, the House has never brought the bill for a vote. We have not, so far, been willing just to study the question of how we might begin the process of tshuva for our nation's history of racial terror. And so any other steps we might take, however well-intentioned, will not affect the atonement we say we desire. Reparations are now part of the national conversation to an extent that would have seemed unthinkable to me just 5 years ago. And yet all too often, when the subject of reparations for slavery comes up among white people, I hear it discussed as if it's a nice theory, but not a practical option for America. But I no longer see any other practical option. We will never cleanse the stain of racist, state-sponsored terror from our country without truth and reconciliation commissions, a complete reckoning of what we, as a nation, if not as individuals, have done to people of color, as well as to women, as well as to LGBTQ folk throughout our history. Only restitution, yes, reparations, will wash the blood off our nation's hands. And that process will be costly and excruciatingly painful, as real tshuva almost always is. I'm still learning my way through all of this, and I feel like I'm a long way from fully understanding all the dimensions of my privilege. I know I miss opportunities to stand up when I could, that I don't always listen well to experiences from the other side of the privilege gap. Still, tonight I hear Maimonides loud in my ears. There can be no tshuva without honest confession and full restitution. So I commit myself here tonight in front of us all to stay in the work, to maintain a careful accounting of my privilege and how it impacts those around me, to listen with radical empathy, to open myself to feedback from my community when I misstep, and to use my privilege in service of those who have historically been left out. And I ask each one of you, in your own ways, to join me in this, because the work is too big for me alone. I need you. We need one another. The work begins now, tonight, within each of us. God, grant us the strength and the compassion to do your will in our world. Our Mariv service continues with the Piyut Ya'aleh, page 223.
Ya'aleh tachanunenu mierev ve'yavo Shabbatenu miboker Rinunenu ad arev Ya'aleh kolenu me'erev Ya'aleh, Ya'aleh, Ya'aleh Ya'aleh koleinu Ya'aleh, Ya'aleh, Ya'aleh Ya'aleh koleinu
Ya'aleh, 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 Ya'aleh koleinu. Oh, Ya'aleh, 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 Ya'aleh koleinu. Ya'aleh koleinu. Ya'aleh
koleinu mi'erev ve'yavo tzidkateinu miboker ve'erev vidyoneinu ad arev
Ya'aleh koleinu.
Ya'aleh koleinu me'erev Ya'aleh, Ya'aleh, Ya'aleh Ya'aleh koleinu
Oh,
Ya'aleh, Ya'aleh, Ya'aleh Ya'aleh koleinu Ya'aleh, Ya'aleh, Ya'aleh Ya'aleh koleinu
Yale, 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 koleinu, dai, 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 yalai, 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 yai, 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 ay, 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 yalai, yai, 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 yalai, yai, yalai, yai, 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 and I lie, down. Ay, 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 and I lie, and I lie, ay, 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 and I lie, ay, lie, 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 ay, lie, lie, and I lie, ay, lie, lie, ay, lie, ay, 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 lie, ho.
We continue on page 225, beginning with the second verse in bold and returning to the refrain in the first line of the page. For your sake, not ours, God, help us. See how we stand before you, humbled and empty-handed. The soul is yours, the body is your creation. Have compassion on your handiwork.
Lemancha Eloheinu aseh velo lanu rei amidateinu dalim verekim lemancha Eloheinu aseh velo lanu rei amidateinu dalim verekim anishama lach ve'aguf lach chosa alam lach anishama lach anishama lach ve'aguf lach chosa alam lach anishama lach lemancha Eloheinu aseh velo lanu rei amidateinu dalim verekim lemancha Eloheinu aseh velo lanu rei amidateinu dalim verekim anishama lach ve'aguf lach chosa alam lach anishama
page 226.
ערך אפיים אתה, ובעל הרחמים נקראת.
We rise as we're able.
תעבור על פשע ותמחה שם כיום ויתייצב עמו שם. תאזין שוועתנו ותקשיבנו מאמר כיום ויקרא בשם אדוני. ויעבור אדוני על פניו ויקרא. אדוני, אדוני, אל רחום וחנון, ערך אפיים ורב חסד באמת, נוצר חסד לאלפים, נושא עוון בפשע וחטא ונקה. וסלחת לעווננו לחטאתנו ונחלתנו. סלח לנו אבינו כי חטאנו, מחל לנו מלכנו כי פשענו, כי אתה אדוני טוב וסלח רב חסד לכל קוראיך.
We can be seated, page 227.
Didida ilahi 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 da ilahi 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 didida ilahi 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 didida ilahi ilahi oh didida ilahi 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 didida ilahi 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 Kine kachome biad hayotze o birtzoto marchi uvirtzoto mekatze. אוקינה אנחנו בידך חסד נוצר לברית הבית ויעטפן ליצר כי כאבן ביד המסתר ברצותו אוחז וברצותו מחטא אוי אוקינה אנחנו בידך לחיי וממוטט לברית הבית ויעטפן ליצר כי הנה כגרזן ביד החרש ברצותו דיבק לאור וברצותו חירש כן אנחנו בידך תומך אני ברש לברית הבית ואל תפן ליצר כי הנה כהגה ביד המלאך ברצותו אוחז וברצותו שילח כן אנחנו בידך אל טוב וסלח לברית הבית ואל תפן ליצר, כי הנה כז זכוכית ביד המזגד, ברצותו חוגג וברצותו ממוגג. איי לי כן אנחנו בידך, מוכל זדון ושגג, דידי לילה ברית הבין, ואל תפן ליצר, כי הנה כעירייה ביד הרוקם,
ברצותו מיישר
וברצותו מעקם, כן אנחנו בידך, אלקנו ונוקם, לברית הבית, ואל תפן ליצר, כי הנה ככסף ביד השורף, ברצותו משגשג וברצותו מצרף. כן, כן אנחנו בידך, ממציא מזור טרף, לברית הבית, ואל תפן ליצר. די 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 די
Page 232.
מתנהג בחסידות, מוחל עוונות עמו. הורית לנו לומר 13, וזכור לנו היום ברית 13, כמו שהודעת לנו מקדם, כמו שכתוב, וירד אדוני בענן, ויתייצב עמו שם, ויקרא בשם אדוני.
We rise as we're able.
ויעבור אדוני על פניו, ויקרא אדוני, אדוני, אל רחום וחנון, אל כפיים, ברב חסד ואמת, נוצר חסד לאלפים, נושא עוון ופשע וחטא ונקי, וסלחת על עווננו ולחטאתנו ונחלתנו. סלח לנו אבינו כי חטאנו, מחל לנו מלכנו כי פשענו, כי אתה אדוני טוב וסלח ורב חסד לכל קוראיך. סלח נא לעוון העם הזה כי גודל חסדיך, וכאשר נסעת לעם הזה ממצרים ביד הנה, ושם נאמר, ויאמר אדוני סלחתי כדבריך.
Page 233. The ark is opened.
Shema Koleinu Adonai Eloheinu Chus v'rachem aleinu v'kabel b'rachamim uv'ratzon et tefilateinu. Hashivenu Adonai elecha v'nashuva chadesh yameinu kekedem.
Hashivenu Adonai elecha v'nashuva chadesh yameinu kekedem.
Al tashlichenu milfanecha v'ruach kodshecha al tikach mimenu.
Al tashlichenu milfanecha v'ruach kodshecha al tikach mimenu.
Al tashlichenu li'eit zikna kichlot kocheinu al ta'azveinu.
Al tashlichenu li'eit zikna kiflot kocheinu al ta'azveinu.
ולמען שמך הגדול, תמחה ותסלח לעווננו, ככתוב בדברי קודשך. למען שמך אדוני, וסלחת לעווני, כי רב הוא.
I invite you to join me in reading in English the paragraph at the bottom of page 233. Our God and God of our ancestors, do not abandon us, do not forsake us, do not shame us, do not annul your covenant with us. Draw us close to your Torah, teach us your mitzvot, show us your ways. Open our hearts to revere your name, circumcise our hearts to love you. Then we will turn to you faithfully with a perfect heart. And as befits your own great name, pardon and forgive our sins, as the psalmist wrote. For the sake of your own name, forgive my sin, though it be great. Feel free to be seated. We turn now to Nikki Morris, our president's congregation, for holiday greetings.
Thank you, Rabbi. Good evening, everyone. This year has been quite a year. Lots of ups and downs, lots of loss and founds. You may recall that in mid-March, when the governor began shutting down the state, at the beginning, speaking of loss, I thought I had lost my mind. My kids were home from school. I was expected to work full-time from home, and my husband was still working at the office. My unit at work was focused on developing policies and protocols for our city employees. We're balancing the need to stay healthy, facilitate at-home schooling for their children, and keeping their jobs. That meant that both my job as a mom and as a city attorney required me to work 24/7. And as COVID invaded Philly, we realized at BZBI that we needed to make some difficult decisions. We continue in-person services? Can we afford to continue to pay our teachers and our staff? If we let them go, how do we provide critical services to our community? Enter the PPP loan, which allowed us to continue to pay our staff. Thanks to God for that. But the application required volumes of documents, and the big banks were not moving applications through the queues. We missed the first round of loans, not knowing whether there'd be any more funds, and it was frightening. But luckily our team stayed on top of the application. We waited, we applied. I lost my cool a few times. My children heard words from their mother that were new and unwelcome to them, but we got it. We found money, which meant we didn't lose one staff member. It was such an amazing relief. With this success came what seemed like a setback. BZBI leadership made the collective decision to suspend in-person prayer. Minyan, Shabbat services, Shiva, holiday celebrations. What were we going to do? Where were we going to turn? The pandemic appeared to be hurting Center City Jews in more ways than just the threat of physical affliction. But then we found a way to connect with our community and reach out to our congregants at home. Thank you, Zoom, and thank you, old-fashioned cell phones. Volunteers called folks at home to check in. We developed programming based on the talents, expertise, and knowledge of our own congregants, Dana Bazelon, Stephen Freed, Jeremy Bannett. We began hosting Shabbat services this summer. Rabbi Annie and Rabbi Abe were in tune to the latest halakha updates and determined that we could stream services live and enjoy Kiddush together virtually. Over the summer, the loss the nation experienced during the winter and spring, the deaths of Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, just to name a few, combined with the death of George Floyd, culminated in protests at City Hall and the destruction of property right down the street from our shul. We could no longer continue to isolate in our own homes and ignore our obligation to recognize the inequalities in this country, to engage in social justice, to educate our children about the differences between our community within Philadelphia, and to help repair the world. But the feeling of loss hit me again. Our police department, my client, struggling to protect its citizens and make good decisions, caught on camera exhibiting terrible judgment on more than one occasion. The newly appointed leader of the department stood up and admitted that we're not doing enough, had made poor decisions, and committed the department to change. This is a commitment that I had not seen before in this city. It was a difficult topic, but heartening to watch and to hear. It was overwhelming, what we had experienced in just a few months during quarantine. And I needed a break. So the four of us, my kids, my husband and I, went to Maine, and we disconnected from work and reconnected with each other and nature and Jews who were experiencing similar feelings of loss and who were looking for some peace. I found peace and friendship and energy to ensure that upon our return to Philly, I would continue to work together with the community toward improving things in our community. When I got back, BZBI had established a book club to educate and empower our members to learn more about how we got to this place of such inequality and how our perspective may not be consistent with those of our neighbors. We connected with Power, who is working with us to remind our community to register to vote so that our opinions may be heard. We're still stocking up. Volunteers scheduled time to come to the shul to prepare meals for our members of our congregation who need us. We're collecting canned goods for food drives because we won't ignore our responsibility to each other. Over the spring and summer, we worked to reopen BZBI's early education program. Our director, Sarah Goldfuss, our teachers, Brian Johnson, Joel Chu, returned to the building to prepare for the arrival of the smallest members of our community. And they're here. They're learning to wear masks, socializing with friends, spreading the love, just being kids. Fast forward a little bit to last week. Rosh Hashanah services were magnificent, especially for my family who was able to enjoy them in their pajamas. The rabbis, our volunteers, the technical preparation and support, the new carpet, all shown from the bima for all of us at home to enjoy. The amazing task force that engineered this event that is most critical to us at this time. The team, the clergy, they all understand the needs of our community and delivered the goods to us under the most unique of circumstances. To hear the sounds of the shofar all over town and to see friends outside on a beautiful day was such a blessing. There's no mistaking that life is different. We need to continue to be careful. We need to be safe, but we don't need to be alone or afraid or quiet. There are plenty of opportunities at BZBI to help make change, form friendships, continue our education, volunteer, to be notorious. And if the right activity or program doesn't exist, help us create it. As my friend Rosalie Kurtz wrote in Econ this week, BZBI is not just a shul, it's a community. I will take it one step further. I think BZBI is a lifeline with the potential to connect with each of us in a way that is personally meaningful. Let's not lose any more time and wait until the pandemic ends to start living, to connect with others, to work toward change. Find your outlet, your cause, your voice. May all of you enjoy a sweet new year and an easy fast.
We turn to page 234.
Eloheinu, Elohei Avoteinu, Silach lanu mechalanu, kaper lanu, ki anu amecha, v'yata Eloheinu, anu v'anecha, v'yata avinu, anu avadecha, v'yata adonenu, anu kehalecha, v'yata chelkeinu, anu nachmatecha, v'yata goraleinu, anu tzonecha, v'yata roeinu, anu karmecha, v'yata notreinu, anu ve'ulatecha, v'yata yotzreinu, anu rayatecha, v'yata dodeinu, anu sigulatecha, v'yata keroveinu, anu amecha, v'yata malkeinu, anu mamirecha, v'yata mamireinu.
We rise as we're able for Bidui.
Anu azei fanim v'ata rachum v'chanun, anu k'shei oref v'ata erech apayim, anu malei avon v'ata malei rachamim, anu yameinu kitzel over v'ata ushnotecha lo yitamu. Eloheinu v'Elohei avoteinu, tavo lefanecha tefilateinu, v'al titala mitchinateinu, she'ein anachnu azei panim ukshei oref, lomar lefanecha Adonai Eloheinu v'Elohei avoteinu, tzadikim anachnu v'lo chatanu, aval anachnu v'avoteinu chatanu.
Page 235.
Ay la 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 la, ay la 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 la, ay la 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 la. Ashamnu, bagadnu, gazalnu, dibarnu dofi. Ay la 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 la, ay la 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 la, ay la 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 la. Evinu v'hirshanu zadu chamasnu tafalnu sheker. Ay la 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 la, ay la 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 la, ay la 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 la. Yatznu ra kizavnu latznu maradnu niatznu sararnu avinu pashanu sararnu kishinu oref. Ay la 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 la, ay la 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 la, ay la 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 la. Rashanu shichatnu Ti'avnu, Ta'inu, Titanu. Sarnu misotecha mishpatecha tovim velo shavalanu. Vata tzadika kol balenu, kemet asita vanachnu hirshanu.
We can be seated. We turn to the bottom of page 236. You know the mysteries of the universe, the deepest secrets of everyone alive. You probe our innermost depths. You examine our thoughts and feelings. Nothing escapes you. Nothing is secret from you. Therefore, may it be your will, our God and God of our ancestors, to forgive us for all our sins, to pardon us for all our iniquities, and to grant us atonement for all our transgressions. We rise again as we're able, page 237.
על חטא שחטאנו לפניך באונס ורצון, ועל חטא שחטאנו לפניך באימוץ הלב, ועל חטא שחטאנו לפניך בבלי דת, על חטא שחטאנו לפניך בביטוי שפתיהם, על חטא שחטאנו לפניך בגלוי ערב, חטא שחטאנו לפניך בהונאת ראייה, ועל חטא שחטאנו sinned against you by scorning parents and teachers, and we've sinned against you purposely and by mistake. We've sinned against you by resorting to violence. We've sinned against you by public desecration of your name. על חטא שחטאנו לפניך ביצר הרע, ועל חטא שחטאנו לפניך ביודעים ובלא יודעים, ועל כולם אלוה סליחות, סלח לנו, מחל לנו, כפר לנו. על חטא שחטאנו לפניך בכחש וכך, על חטא שחטאנו לפניך בכפת שוחד. על חטא שחטאנו לפניך בעיניים רמות, ועל חטא שחטאנו לפניך בעזות מצח, ועל כולם אלוה סליחות, סלח לנו, מחל לנו, כפר לנו. We've sinned against you by throwing off our esteem. We've sinned against you by rashly judging others. על חטא שחטאנו לפניך בציות שחטאנו לפניך בקלות ראש, ועל חטא שחטאנו לפניך בקשיות עורף, על חטא שחטאנו לפניך ברצות רגליים ורכלות, חטא שחטאנו לפניך בשבועת שווא, על חטא שחטאנו לפניך בשנאת חינם, על חטא שחטאנו לפניך בתשומת יד, ועל חטא שחטאנו לפניך בתימהון לבב, ועל כולם אלוה סליחות, סלח לנו, מחל לנו, כפר לנו. המצוות הזה.
We remain standing for an additional confession tonight. We have added to tonight's service an al-chet for the sins of racism written by Yavila McCoy, an African-American Jew. And we recite this litany not because it's true of any one of us, not even because it is true of BZBI as a whole, but because it is most certainly true of the American Jewish community over history and still to this day. And so as we present the words on the screen, I invite you to join with Rabbi Annie and I in reciting this Al-Chet. For the sins we have committed through conscious and unconscious racial bias,
and for the sins we have committed through hardening our hearts to the need for change.
for the sins of colluding with racism both openly and secretly,
And for the sins we have committed through uttering racist words.
for the sins we have committed through acts of racial microaggression,
And for the sins we have committed through the denial of the Tselem Elohim, the divine spark within black bodies.
for the sins we have committed through segregating Jewish souls in black bodies from participation and leadership within our institutions,
And for the sins we have committed in deceiving others by not teaching our children the worth and value of black people in Jewish space.
for the sins we have committed in not honoring and protecting the journeys of black elders and black children in Jewish space,
And for the sins we have committed in exploiting black people and black bodies in our business dealings.
for the sins we have committed in not caring for the ways that race and class intersect in our effort to welcome black people in Jewish space,
And for the sins we have committed through turning black bodies into objects of lust and sexual gratification.
for the sins we have committed through confessing our commitments to ending racism insincerely,
And for the sins we have committed that desecrate the divine name by allowing white supremacy to shape and determine our practice of Judaism.
for the sins of racism that we have committed knowingly and unknowingly that continue to do damage to our siblings, children, families, and community,
And for the sins of racism we have committed through creating hierarchies of value between our siblings from Europe and those from the Middle East and Africa.
for the sins of racism we have committed through engaging in foolish racial talk and gossip in our places of worship,
And for the sins of racism we have committed through haughty demeanor and proud looks. For the sins of racism we have committed through the glances of our eyes.
for the sins of racism we have committed through passing judgment,
And for the sins of racism that we have committed through baseless hatred.
for the sins of racism that we have committed through turning a blind eye to pain and suffering around us,
And for the sins of racism that we have committed by not seeing racism as an evil among us. For the
For all-
sins of racism that we have committed by not committing to end it.
For all these, we seek pardon, forgiveness, and atonement.
We can be seated. We turn to the bottom of page 242. God of mercy, who answers the brokenhearted, answer us.
Rachamana de'anei, de'anei lani, oy me'aneinan. Rachamana de'anei, de'anei lani, oy me'aneinan. Rachamana de'anei, de'anei lani, oy me'aneinan. Rachamana de'anei litzviriba, oy aneinan, oy aneinan. Rachamana de'anei litzviriba, oy aneinan, oy aneinan. Rachamana de'anei, de'anei lani, oy aneinan. Rachamana de'anei, de'anei lani, oy aneinan. Oy Rachamana de'anei. Litzvir liba, Yanena, Yanena, Rachamana, Deyane, Litzvir liba, Yanena, Yanena, Rachamana, Deyane, Deyane, Lani, Oy Veyanena. Rachamana deyane deyane lani oy veyanena oy Rachamana deyane litvir liba oy yanena Rachamana deyane litvir liba Hoyanena, Hoyanena.
Page 243, we rise as we're able as the ark is open for Avinu Malkeinu.
Avinu Malkeinu, Chatanu Lefanecha. Avinu Malkeinu, Ein Lanu Melech Ela Ata, Avinu Malkeinu. Avinu Malkeinu, Achazirenu b'tshuva shlema lefanecha. Avinu Malkeinu, shlach refuah shlema lecholei amecha. Avinu Malkeinu, Zachreinu b'zikaron tov lefanecha. Avinu Malkeinu, Katveinu b'sefer chayim tovim. Avinu Malkeinu, Katveinu b'sefer gula v'yishua. Avinu Malkeinu, Katveinu b'sefer gula v'yishua. Avinu Malkeinu, Katveinu b'sefer parnasa v'chalkala. Avinu Malkeinu, Katveinu b'sefer parnasa v'chalkala. Avinu Malkeinu, Katveinu b'sefer zichuyot. Avinu Malkeinu, Katveinu b'sefer zichuyot. Avinu Malkeinu, Katveinu b'sefer slicha umchila. Avinu Malkeinu, Katveinu b'sefer slicha umchila. Avinu Malkeinu atzmach lani shua b'karov. Avinu Malkeinu Haim Kein Yisrael Machat. Avinu Malkeinu aseh lemancha im lo lemanenu. Avinu Malkeinu chonenu vanenu. Avinu Malkeinu chonenu vanenu. Ki ein banu maasim aseh imanu tzedaka v'chesed aseh imanu tzedakah v'chesed v'hoshienu. Aseh imanu tzedakah v'chesed. Aseh imanu tzedakah v'chesed v'hoshienu.
The ark is closed and we can be seated. We turn to page 245, Kaddish Shalem.
Yitkadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabbah.
Amen.
V'yahalema divrach yirtei v'yamelich malchutei b'chayechonu v'yomechonu v'chayei lechol Beit Yisrael v'agala v'zman kariv yimeru. Amen. Yehi shmei Rabbam barach le'olam lo me'omayim. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitbar v'yitomam v'yitnaseh v'yitadar v'yitalei v'yitalal shemei t'kudusha barichu. Liela, Liela, min kol berchata v'shirata, tushberata v'nechemata, damiran b'yoma v'yimeru. Amen. Titkabal tzloton uvoton l'chol Yisrael, kodam avahundi v'shmaya v'yimeru. Amen. Yesh lamarava min shemaya v'chayim aleinu v'kol Yisrael v'yimeru. Amen. Ose shalom b'imromav, u'yatse shalom aleinu, v'al kol Yisrael, v'al kol yoshvei tevel v'yimeru. Amen.
Amen.
We turn now to Kara Levinson, a vice president of our congregation, to share this evening's announcements.
Hello. It's my pleasure and honor to welcome everyone to services for this most sacred of all days of the new year. On behalf of the clergy, officers, board of directors, staff of BZBI, I wish you a new year of health, peace, and contentment. I want to thank Rabbi Abe, Rabbi Annie, and Rabbi Yosef for leading us in such a moving Kol Nidre service. I don't know about you, but I really felt every moment. It was stirring and beautiful and thought-provoking. Thank you. And I also want to thank the staff, every one of them, for making these high holidays not only possible, but meaningful and moving. And Nikki, thank you for your beautiful words and your tireless leadership. The magnificent flowers on the bima are sponsored by Nancy Rothbard and Brian Boucher, Bonnie and Jay Eisner, or Eileen Fickler, Jay Margolis and Art Fishman, Gary and Marianne Ruby Emmett, Sandra Goldberg, Sheldon and Andrea Hoffman-Jelen, Judy and Tom Kleiman, Rosalie Kurtz, Barbara Procession and family, the Reich Epstein family, Laurie Wagman, and Joseph Zaritsky. Services will begin tomorrow at 9:30 a.m. The Torah service approximately at 10:30 a.m. Mincha will be at 4:45 p.m. and Nila at 6:15 p.m. The fast ends at 7:28. Youth and family services begin at 9 o'clock a.m. Please check the youth and family schedule for details. If you did not pick up a copy of the Book of Remembrance, which will be used for tomorrow's Yizkor service, you can find Yizkor on page 290 of your Machzor. Since Yizkor is said 4 times a year, you may pick up a copy of the Book of Remembrance after the holidays to use at the other times of the year. Information went out by email earlier today about how you can reserve time for meals in our BZBI Sukkah, which will be erected on Spruce Street. After the holiday, please check your email for details and call the office to make a reservation. Reservation is important. I'd also like to remind you that the Machzorim barred for the holiday must be returned to the office no later than October 30th. May we all have an easy fast. May this new year bring us renewed family relationships, warm friendships, and the blessing of good health. Good night.
We turn to page 246. We rise as we're able for Aleinu.
עלינו לשבח לאדון הכל, לתת גדולה ליוצר בראשית, שלא עשנו כגויי הארצות, ולא שמנו כמשפחות האדמה, שלא שם חלקנו כהם, וגורלנו כחומונם. ואנחנו קוראים ומשתחווים ומודים לפני מלך מלכי המלכים הקדוש ברוך הוא, שהוא נוטה שמיים ויוסד הארץ, ומושב קרוב בשמיים עמך, ושכינתו זו בגובי מרומים. הוא אלוהינו אין עוד, אמת מלכנו אפס זולתו, כתוב בתורתו, ידעת היום להשיב אל לבבך, כי אדוני הוא האלוהים, לשמיים ממעל, והארץ מתחת, אין עוד. על כן יקבל לך אדוני אלוהינו, ויקבלו כולם את מלכותך ודמך עליהם העולם בוער. כך כתוב בתורתך, אדוני ימלוך לעולם בהן, ונאמר, והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ, ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד, ושמו אחד, ושמו אחד.
We turn to page 248, the psalm for this season. We can be seated.
לדוד, אדוני אורי ואישי, ממי יירא, אדוני מעוז חיי מבחד בקרוב אלי מרעים לחות בצורה. אחת שאלתי מאת אדוני, אותה אבקש. אחת שאלתי מאת אדוני, אותה אבקש. הושיבתי בבית אדוני כל ימי חיי, לחזות בנועם אדוני ולבקר בהיכלו, לחזות בנועם אדוני ולבקר בהיכלו. יספינני פסוקו ביום רע סנצון. לך אמר ליבי בקשו בנה את פניך אדוני אבקש לולא האמנתי לראות בטוב אדוני בארץ חיים, קווה אל אדוני חזק בימי ציבך וקווה אל אדוני.
Invite those in mourning and those marking a yahrzeit to rise as we turn to the Mourner's Kaddish, page 247. Yitgadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabbah.
Amen.
B'alma divrach irutei v'yamlich malchutei. B'chayechon uvyomechon uv'chayei d'chol beit Yisrael. Ba'agala uvizman kariv v'imru amen. Yehei shmei Rabbah mevorach u'olamam l'omei almaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh. V'it hadar, v'it aleh, v'it halal, shemei dekudasha barichu.
Barichu.
La'ela, la'ela, mikol birchata v'shirata, tushbechata v'nechamata, da'amiran be'alma v'imru, amen.
Amen.
Yehi shalama rabba min shemaya, v'chaim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru, amen.
Amen.
Oseh shalom b'mromav, hu ya'aseh shalom, aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'al kol yoshvei tevel v'imru, amen. Imenu Shabashamayim, Divine Parent, on this most difficult of days, on this most beautiful, most blessed of days, grace us with the courage to do what is right even when it is hard, with the strength to do what is just even when it is risky. Open our hearts so that compassion and love and joy will define our relationships with everyone we meet. And fulfill for us the verse, V'haya ka'etz shatul al palgei mayim, may we be like trees planted on banks of flowing water. Asher piryo yitain be'ito, let our fruit blossom in its time. Ve'alehu lo yibol, may our leaves never wither. V'chol asher yaseh yatzliach, may everything we undertake succeed. For it is your will we seek to do. And I invite you to join me in saying, Amen.
Amen.
You'll find Yigdal on page 250.
Yigdal Elohim chai ve'yishtabach nimtza yenei tametziuto echad ve'yen yachid keichudo נעלם וגם אין סוף לאחדותו, אין לו דמות הגוף ואינו גוף, לא נערוך אליו קדושתו, קדמו לכל דבר אשר נברא ראשון ואין ראשית לראשיתו, הינו אדון עולם לכל נוצר, יורה גדולתו ומלכותו, שפע נבואתו נתנו אל אנשי סגולתו ותפארתו. לא קם בישראל כמו שאול נביא ומביט את אמונתו, תורת אמת נתן לעמו אל על יד נביאו נאמן ביתו, לא יכל יפעל ולא ימיר דתו לעולמים לזולתו, צופה ויודע צערנו, מביט לסוף דבר בקמתו, גומר לאיש חסד כמפעלו, נוטה לרשע רע כרשעתו, תשלח לקץ ימים משיחנו, לפדות מחכה קץ ישועתו, מתים יחייהם ברוך חסדו, ברוך הדעה Hashem Tehilato, Meitim Yechayel Berach Chasdo, Baruch Adei Hashem Tehilato. Shana Tova.
Shana Tova Techatemu. May you be sealed for a good year.
Miss greeting everybody at the back door. Shana Tova, Rabbeim.
Ah,
Shana
Yeshua
Tova. Yeshua Koach. Shana Tova.
Shana Tova, thank you all so much for being in the sanctuary with us.
Yeah, we'll see you in the morning.